So we are looking at Dryden's essay of Dramatick Poesie. Dryden is pointing out the weaknesses of classical drama as compared to modern drama. We see here Eugenius, who is defending modern drama. In the last discussion, he discussed construction of a classical play and then the scenes, the act division, and now he takes up the comedies. In their comedies, the Romans generally borrowed their plots from the Greek poets, and theirs was commonly a little girl stolen or wandered from her parents, brought back unknown to the city, there got with child by some lewd young fellow, who by the help of his servant cheats his father, and when her time comes to cry Juno Lucina fair open, one or other sees a little box or cabinet which was carried away with her, and so discovers her to her friends, if some god do not prevent it by coming down in a machine and taking the thanks of it to himself. So, with reference to classical tragedies, Eugenius had said that the stories of all the plays are known to the audience from before, and therefore there is no delight that the audience finds in witnessing the repetition of the same stories again and again. In comedy also, he says that in classical plays we find that there are some formula in these plays, and the Romans borrowed from the Greeks these formulas, and they give the formula which makes it appear very trite. So just as it reminds us of Bollywood films. The same kind of formula, the same kind of masala that we find in Bollywood films. So in the classical comedies we see that a girl is stolen or wanders from her parents, then comes to an unknown city, and there some young fellow makes her pregnant, and then she prays to Juno, the god of childbirth, the goddess of childbirth. Juno Lucina fair open means goddess of childbirth Juno, please help me. This sentence is found in Terence's Andria, Terence's comedy Andria. Then somebody sees a box or a cabinet which came with the girl, from which the identity of the girl will be discovered, and sometimes a god comes down from above and prevents any character to discover it, so that he can take the whole credit of the discovery. So this is a veiled criticism of the use of deus ex machina, God coming down from the machine. As you know that in classical drama, a machine was used to lower down a god or goddess from above on the stage, which practice was also continued in the Renaissance. But this practice was often abused, and therefore Dryden criticizes or ridicules the practice of lowering down somebody from the machine. Here is a note. Deus ex machina, a god brought onto the Greek stage by some mechanical device to resolve a complex dramatic situation. Johnson's scorn for the device is expressed in the prologue to Every Man in His Humour, Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson writes, "Nor creaking throne comes down, the boy is to please. And Corneille in his Discours de Trois Unités, the discourse of three unities, which Dryden is largely following in this essay, also speaks of the convention of using deus ex machina. So Dryden follows Ben Jonson and Corneille in his criticism of this convention. By the plot, you may guess much of the characters of the persons. An old father would willingly, before he dies, see his son well married. This debauched son, kind in his nature to his mistress, but miserable in want of money. A servant or slave who has so much wit to strike in with him and help to dupe his father. A braggadocio captain, parasite, and a lady of pleasure. So these are common characters or stock characters in classical comedy. Old father, debauched son, the son is kind towards his mistress but always lacks money. A slave or a servant who is always represented as witty, because you may know that the Romans used to have Greeks as their slaves or servants, and the Greeks were always more educated than the Romans. So even their servants or slaves, they were more educated or witty. Sometimes they were also teachers, but they were slaves. So the witty servant joins the son in cheating his father. The captain, a parasite, braggadocio means braggart or vain, proud man, and the lady of pleasure means a prostitute. So these are the common characters or stock characters in classical comedies. But the poor girl, who should be the chief, protagonist in the play, she is a mute. That is, she is not given any speech by the writer. As for the poor honest maid on whom the story is built and who ought to be one of the principal actors in the play, she is commonly a mute in it. This was also a custom of classical plays, having a character who won't speak. Such characters were called mutes. She has the breeding of the old Elizabeth way, which was for maids to be seen and not to be heard. Dryden is also ridiculing the customs of the Elizabethan period, where women were supposed to be timid, humble, and introvert, and they were not supposed to speak, but they were supposed to be seen. And it is enough, she is willing to be married when the fifth act requires it. The fifth act would be the act of resolution of the plot, and therefore the marriage must take place in that act, and the heroine or the girl must be willing to marry, otherwise the plot won't be dissolved. So the fifth act demands this, and the girl has to comply. These are plots built after the Italian mode of houses. You see through them all at once. So Italian plays imitated this kind of theatre. You see through the plot. You understand the plot at one go. You have no difficulty, because you know the formula. The plays never deviate from the common formula. Characters are indeed the imitations of nature, but so narrow as if they had imitated only an eye or an hand, and did not dare to venture on the lines of a face or the proportion of a body. So Dryden is being humorous here. So imitation of nature means that one would imitate the whole object. In the case of characterization, a whole person. But the imitation in classical comedies are so narrow that Dryden jokingly says that they imitate only an ear or an eye, but not the whole body. But in how straight a compass soever they have bounded their plots and characters will pass it by, if they have regularly pursued them and perfectly observed those three unities of time, place and action. So Dryden follows neoclassical roots and says that we will, forgive them, we will pardon them for not creating characters well, if they follow the three unities. So this the emphasis on three unities were entirely neoclassical. As I already told you, we do not find it in classical literature. And in this essay also Dryden says that neither Aristotle nor Horace speaks of the three unities. The knowledge of which you say is derived to us from them. So Eugenius is skeptical about this claim that the three unities come to us from the ancients. He is of the opinion that the ancients did not know much of writing drama. Their plays were poorly constructed. But in the first place, give me leave to tell you that the unity of plays, however it might be practiced by them, was never any of their roots. We neither find it in Aristotle, Horace, or any who have written of it, till in our age the French poets first made it a precept of the stage. So, through Eugenius, Dryden makes this statement that the three unities are not to be found as a rule in the writings of Aristotle or Horace, but we find them in the French dramatists. So, since Dryden as a neoclassical poet was influenced by the 17th century French poets and dramatists, so he mentions them. But because they are the immediate influence. But as we know that the French neoclassicists, they did not invent the rule of three unities. It was invented by Castelvetro, the Italian neoclassical writer, and Philip Sidney mentions it in an apology for poetry, where he draws it from Castelvetro. So Sidney, writing before Dryden, was more conversant of the European writings and knew the source of the roots to Castelvetro, whereas we see that Dryden, by this time in England, people read less of Italian writing and more of French writing, so Dryden could not realize that the French poets were not the source. The unity of time, even Terence himself was the best and most regular of them, has neglected. So Terence and Plautus were the two great classical writers of comedy. Dryden says that even Terence neglected the unity of time. His Euton to Monumenus, or Self-Punisher, takes up visibly 2 days. His play, Euton to Monumenus, which means the Self-Punisher, has the time frame of 2 days. You know that the unity of time requires the time frame to be 1 day, as Aristotle says, a single revolution of the sun, which is ambiguous, and the later neoclassical critics were divided over it, whether the time should be 12 hours or 24 hours. But in no case it can be 2 days, which you find in Terence. Says Scaliger, the 2 first acts concluding the first day, the 3 last the day ensuing. And Euripides, in tying himself to 1 day, has committed an absurdity never to be forgiven him. So trying to maintain the unity of time of 1 day, in Euripides' play we find this absurdity that in one of his tragedies he has made Theseus go from Athens to Thebes, which was about 14-ish miles, under the walls of it to give battle and appear victorious in the next act. And yet from the time of his departure to the return of the Nuntius, that is the messenger, who gives the relation of his victory, Ithra and the chorus have but 36 verses, which is not for every mile of verse. So in these lines, Dryden is very closely following Corneille. in his The Discourse of Three Unities. Corneille mentions them. A reference here is to the suppliers. Euripides' play The Suppliers. Dryden does not mention the play, so he makes some changes from Corneille here. But the thing is actually in Corneille, the whole thing more or less is faithful to Corneille here. So Euripides makes Theseus go from Athens to Thebes, which is a long distance, and then give battle, and in the next act he appears as victorious. But on the stage, Ithra and Chorus, they are present, and they can speak only 36 verses from the point of the departure of Theseus and the arrival of the messenger to report his victory. So while two characters speak on the stage, this whole thing, the audience must believe this whole thing happens. Theseus travels for 40 miles, fights, the battle is over, and he becomes victorious, and the messenger again comes back or travels 40 miles to Thebes and reports that Theseus is victorious. All this happens in this interval where characters on the stage can speak only 36 verses. So it is a great compromise, and it is not very similar. It does not appear to be realistic at all. So Dryden is, kind of joking or mocking the failure of the ancient through Eugenius here. The like error is as evident in Terence's Eunuch. Terence's play Eunuchus or Eunuch, where Laches, the old man, enters by mistake into the house of Thais, where betwixt his exit and the entrance of Pythias, who comes to give ample relation of the disorders he has raised within, Parmeno, who was left upon the stage, has not above 5 lines to speak. So in this play, Eunuch, Terence shows this old man Laches entering into the house of Thais. And then after he enters this house, he creates many disorders. And another character, Parmeno, who was on the stage, he can hardly speak 5 lines, before which Pythias comes to the stage and reports all the disturbances that the old man Laches has caused. So this is too short a time for all these things to happen. And Dryden quotes from Corneille, "C'est bien employé un temps si court." So the poet employs here a very short time. Says the French poet, who furnished me with one of the observations. The French poet is Corneille. And almost all their tragedies will afford us examples of the like nature. So this is an example from comedy, but Dryden says that if we examine the tragedies, then also we will see that the unity of time cannot be properly maintained and often strains our credulity. It is true they have kept the continuity, or as you called it, liaison de scène, somewhat better. Two do not perpetually come in together, talk and go out together, and other two succeed them and do the same throughout the act, which the English call by the name of single scenes. The liaison de scène, that is a link of the scenes. Basically it is about the unity of action. The French plays maintain it better, Eugenius says. So two people are on the stage, they talk, and when they leave, then another two characters come. But the reason is because they have seldom about 2 or 3 scenes properly so called in every act. For it is to be accounted a new scene, not only stage is empty, but every person who enters, though to others, makes it so, because he introduces a new business. So he criticizes French play by saying that the English call these scenes. There is when two persons are talking, and then when they leave, another two persons enter. So each of these the English would call a scene. But Eugenius says that in French plays there are not more than 3 scenes. So the number of scenes is very small, and therefore when some characters leave the stage and other characters enter, they begin a completely new business. So now the plots of their plays being narrow and the persons few, one of their acts was written in a less compass than one of our well-wrought scenes. Our means English. So the acts of French plays are sometimes shorter than the scenes of English plays. So you may understand how French plays were very thin. They followed the neoclassical model very strictly. The English dramatists, they took recourse to a lot of invention. There would be a lot of characters and much action, but French plays would be threadbare. So Eugenius praises the English plays compared to the French. To go no further than Terence, you find in the eunuch Antiphon entering single in the middle of the third act after Cremus and Pythias were gone off. He gives the example again from Terence's eunuch and says that the eunuch Antiphon enters alone in the middle of the third act, and the two characters, Cremus and Pythias, leave. In the same play you have likewise Dorius beginning the fourth act alone. So the convention of two characters being on the stage and performing and then leaving and another two characters coming, that convention is also not mentioned in French neoclassical drama, because sometimes we see only one character coming. The reason is that these French plays had very few characters. Dorius begins the fourth act alone, and after she has made a relation of what was done at the soldiers' entertainment, which by the way was very inartificial, because she was presumed to speak directly to the audience and to acquaint them with what was necessary to be known, but yet should have been so contrived by the poet as to have been told by persons of the drama to one another, and so by them to have come to the knowledge of the people. She quits the stage, and Phrygia enters next alone likewise. So Dryden through Eugenius says here that we see a single character, Dorius, entering in the fourth act, and she speaks directly to the audience and narrates to them what happened at the soldiers' entertainment. But instead of such direct address to the audience, actually this should have been enacted through the performance of a number of characters on the stage. But in classical drama, most actions are reported. And this Eugenius thinks is a defect. In the next act, again, a single character enters. So if there is a single character on the stage, she cannot perform with another character, so there cannot be any action. Therefore, the single character can only address the audience and tell them what is happening, and that is a poor dramatization according to Eugenius. Phrygia enters next. He also gives you an account of himself and of his returning from the country in monologue, to which unnatural way of narration Terence is subject in all his plays. Now, earlier also, when Dorius gives the report of the soldiers' entertainment, Dryden writes that it was very inartificial. Inartificial means unskillful. Inartificial means it is not artistic enough, it is unskilled. Similar thing happens when Phrygia enters and speaks about himself in a monologue. So a character should not speak about himself, other characters should speak about him. In his Adelphi or brothers, Cyrus and Dimia enter after the scene was broken by the departure of Sostrata, Geta and Kanthara. And indeed you can scarce look into any of his comedies where you will not presently discover the same interruption. So Dryden says that in Terence's plays, it is found in most of his comedies that a single character enters and speaks to the audience, which is very unskillful. But as they have failed both in laying up their plots and in the management, swerving from the rules of their own art by misrepresenting nature to us, in which they have ill-satisfied one intention of the play, which was delight, so in the instructive part they have erred worse. So Eugenius says that the two aims, the two goals of drama was to delight and instruct. So in delighting, these plays failed because either there was the same story, repetition of the story, rehashed time and again, in characterization, in plot making, there were many weaknesses. So they misrepresented nature. Therefore, their plays are not very delightful. In instruction part also, they have erred the worse. That is, they have been even less successful. Instead of punishing vice and rewarding virtue, they have often shown a prosperous wickedness and an unhappy piety. So this is something against which Aristotle warned in the Poetics, that the dramatist should never show the man full of vice is rewarded. So an evil man should be punished and a good man should be rewarded. This is what is called poetic justice, theorized later, mostly in the 18th century. But from the time of Aristotle, it was believed that evil should not be rewarded because it goes against our understanding of morality. But in classical plays, often Eugenius says, we often see the opposite. A wicked man is represented as prosperous and a pious man is represented as unhappy. So prosperous wickedness, unhappy piety are represented. They have set before us a bloody image of revenge in media and given her dragons to convey her safe from punishment. In Euripides' Medea, Medea takes a bloody revenge. She kills her own children, but instead of being punished for this murderous act, a dragon comes and she lives on this dragon. She leaves the place, so she is not punished. So here Eugenius is criticizing Euripides' Medea. Priam and Astyanax murdered and Cassandra ravished, and the last and murder ending in the victory of him who acted them. So these stories were well known to everybody, and the murder and rape go unpunished. In short, there is no indecorum in any of our modern plays, which if I would excuse, I could not shadow with some authority from the ancients. So Eugenius turns the tables against the ancients. Titus had represented the ancients as the most respected writers and models. Eugenius turns the tables and establishes that they have neglected all the rules of writing and they did not even satisfy our moral sentiment. So in modern plays we do not see such indecorum. Decorum is a concept taken from Horace, classical concept. Eugenius has demonstrated that in ancient plays there is plenty of indecorum. On the contrary, in modern plays we do not see such indecorum. And one further note of them, let me leave you. Tragedies and comedies were not read then as they are now, promiscuously by the same person. So in ancient times, the writers of tragedy did not write comedy, and the writers of comedy did not write tragedy. So we have specialists. Plotus and Terence wrote only comedy. Sophocles, Euripides, they wrote only tragedy, and so on. This is so plain that I did not instance to you that Aristophanes, Plotus, Terence, never any of them read a tragedy. Read means wrote. None of them wrote a tragedy. Aeschylus, Euripides, Sophocles and Seneca never meddled with comedy. So these are all famous writers of tragedy. Aeschylus, Euripides and Sophocles are Greek and Seneca is Roman, and they never wrote a comedy. The sock and buskin were not worn by the same poet. This is an allusion to the use of low shoe for characters in comedy, and characters in tragedy use high boot. So the low shoe was called sock and the high boot was called buskin. So the characters of tragedy and comedy, they were kept separate, and no poet wrote both for the sock and the buskin, that is both for both tragedy and comedy. Having them so much care to excel in one kind, very little is to be pardoned them if they miscarried in it. So since they wrote only one kind of play, so they cannot be forgiven for making mistakes, because they were specialists, they were experts in writing only one kind of play. And this would lead me to the consideration of their wit, had not Critias given me sufficient warning not to be too bold in my judgment of it. So the fact that the ancients did not write plays satisfactorily, so I should doubt their wit, that is their talent. But I am not making any comments on that because Critias warned me to be too bold. So Eugenius says that much more severe comments could be made against the ancients, but out of consideration of what Critias told me, I am not making those comments. Because the language is being dead and many of the customs and little accidents on which it depended lost to us, we are not competent judges of it. So the ancient languages, they are now dead, and we are not familiar or we do not know many of the customs. Therefore we may not understand their place properly. So they should be given the benefit of doubt. But though I grant that here and there we may miss the application of a proverb or a custom, yet a thing well said will be wit in all languages. Now he examines even this idea that because the languages are dead, we do not know their custom. He says that even if we miss the proverb or custom, even if we do not understand that, but anything that has been said well, that can be translated in any language. Yet to him who reads it in the original, it is still the same. He has an idea of its excellency, though it cannot pass from his mind into any other expression or words than those in which he finds it. So, okay, let us assume that in translation a lot may be lost. We may not be able to properly transfer the talent of the original in the translation. But those who read in the original, and in Dryden's time, most educated gentlemen would read Greek and Roman plays is the original, at least the Roman plays. Therefore, this excuse does not hold. The excellence of the play should be properly conveyed, properly realized if one reads it in the original. When Phrygia and the eunuch had a command from his mistress to be absent 2 days, and encouraging himself to go through with it, said, Tandem ego non illa cardiam, si opus sit, vel totum trinum. Parmeno, to mock the softness of his master, lifting up his hands and eyes, cries out as it were in admiration, Qui universum trinum, the elegancy of which universum, though it cannot be rendered in our language, yet it leaves an impression on our souls. So here Eugenius is referring to Phrygia. This is from Terence's Eunuchus. The character is Phrygia. So the question is, pray, cannot I go without her if necessary, even for 3 days running? To this question, the servant replies wittily, phew, 3 whole days. So it is like we joke in this manner even today. So somebody is saying that you cannot go out for 3 days, and then you ask for 3 whole days. So the suggestion is that 3 days are not very little. So this kind of wit can be realized if one knows Latin well enough to understand how the servant Parmeno, how he uses the word universum, which means whole. Universum tridu, 3 whole days. So how he uses the word universum, one who knows Latin well will only understand the humor or the elegance. Though it cannot be rendered in our language, yet it gives an impression on our souls. But this happens seldom in him, in Plautus oftener. So in Terence, Eugenius says this genuine expression of talent in language, in this case, it is more of an exception. It can be found very little in Terence, but in Plautus it is found more often. Metaphors and in Plautus oftener, who is infinitely too bold in his metaphors and poetic words, out of which many times his wit is nothing, which questionless was one reason why Horace falls upon him so severely in those verses. Now, Plautus is also not spared, because Eugenius says that Plautus, this kind of humor or elegance depends upon use of words and metaphors, which meant too much reliance upon language, too much reliance upon words rather than upon drama or upon action. So Plautus uses metaphors and words very efficiently, and he also coins many new words, creating a lot of humor. And this becomes the reason of Plautus being criticized by Horace. And here is the quotation from Horace, these 3 lines in Latin, which means, from Ars Poetica of course, yet our forefathers praised both the verse and the wit of Plautus, being too tolerant, not to say foolish. Stolide. Sed proebi nostri Plotinus et numerus et laudavere sales nenium patienter utrumque ne becomes stolide. Our forefathers praised Plautus for his use of language and wit, by which we may say that our forefathers, if they were not foolish, they may be at least too tolerant. They may be called to be too tolerant. For Horace himself was cautious to obtrude a new word on his readers, and makes custom and common use the best measure of receiving it into our writings. Therefore, you may realize that as time passed, theory became more and more developed and critics became more and more sophisticated. Therefore, the ancient comedy of the Greeks, from the point of view of a sophisticated critic like Horace, they often appear to be not up to the standard. So, Horace himself was very careful with use of words or coining of new words also. So, multa, this quotation, multa renacentur quae etc. It means many terms that have fallen out of use shall be born again, and those now in repute shall fall, if usage wills it so, in whose hands lies the judgment, the law, and the rule of speech. So, here we see Horace realizes this fact about language, that words come and go out of fashion. So, words which were once fashionable, later they become outdated, and new words become fashionable, and use of which kind of words is acceptable would depend upon the usage of a particular time. So, use of ancient words is called archaism, which was considered to be a fault. But as you know that Spencer used archaism and also neologism, that is coining new words. So initially Spencer's poetry was not praised but were criticized. His poems were criticized for using archaism and neologism. But as it was later realized that these enriched the language, therefore to perfectly judge any poet, it is very important to apply the theory of his time to his poetry. If you apply the theory of a later age on a poet of an earlier age, then it is unfair, and that poet would be found to be deficient, because convention, usage, everything will change, will have changed. The not observing this rule is that which the world has blamed in our satirist Cleveland. So once again, Dryden cannot accept Cleveland, so he often blames Clevelandism. Cleveland and John Dryden were contemporary poets. Cleveland used obscure words. To express a thing hard and unnaturally is his new way of elocution. So you remember that earlier also in this essay Dryden spoke about catachresis, the rhetorical figure where words are often used in unconventional ways, obscuring the meaning. Catachresis is very common in metaphysical poetry, and here again Dryden says that his new way of elocution, that is his choice of words, is very unconventional. He is true no poet, but may sometimes use a catachresis. It is not that catachresis can never be used, because he gives examples from Virgil, Ovid. Virgil does it, Nistaque ridenti colcasia fundet acantho. It means it is from eclopes. The Egyptian bean mixed with the smiling acanthus will grow abundantly. So catachresis or wit here lies in the phrase smiling acanthus. How can flowers be smiling? But this is rhetorical, in his Eclogue of Polio and in his 7th Aeneid, that is 7th book of Aeneid, Dryden uses these phrases which mean the waves and broke marble, startled by the warriors' flashing shields and the painted ships. Waves and groves marvel, they are surprised. So how can waves and groves be surprised? So it is catachresis. Dryden writes 7th book of Aeneid, but actually it is 8th book of the Aeneid. And Ovid wants so modestly that he asks leave to do it. And these lines from Ovid, Metamorphosis: if I may make bold to say it, I will not fear to call this place the Palatia of high heaven. Palatia was the name of the palace of Augustus, the Roman emperor. So Ovid uses catachresis with some kind of apology, if I may be allowed to say. Then this place I would call the palace, the Palatia of the heavens. So Ovid was describing the heavens, but he compares them to Augustus's palace, which is catachresis, because how can Augustus's palace or Palatia be superior to the heavens, to anything, any architecture in heavens? Calling the court of Jupiter by the name of Augustus his palace, though in another place he is more bold, where he says, "Et longus vis in Capitolia pompous," which means, and capitals witness long processions. Capitol, you know, is the central plaza or the central place in the capital city. So in Rome there was the Capitol. In Washington today in America there is the Capitol. So Capitol witnesses long processions. Capitol is not inanimate. How can it witness processions? So these are the examples from Ovid of use of catachresis. But to do this always and never be able to write a line without it, though it may be admired by some few pedants, will not pass upon those who know that wit is best conveyed to us in the most easy language. So Dryden criticizes this practice of Cleveland, and we will later say of John Donne also. The practice of using such wit, such rhetorical figure, which makes meaning very obscure, constantly, it is an abuse of language. So Dryden's point is that once or twice the poet may use catachresis, but if he uses it constantly, perpetually, then it is a fault of language, because poetry should be conveyed in language which is easy to understand, most easy language, and is most to be admired when a great thought comes dressed in words so commonly received that it is understood by the meanest apprehensions, as the best meat is the most easily digested. So, comparing great thought to great meat, best meat. The best meat is very quickly and easily digested. Similarly, great thought should be expressed with such easy words that even a person of low intelligence can appreciate it. Now, this is the most difficult thing to express high thought in a simple language. But we cannot read a verse of Cleveland's without making a face at it as if every word were a pill to swallow. So Cleveland's verses, they are so obscure that we make faces as when swallowing pills of medicine. He gives us many times a hard nut to break our teeth without a kernel for our pains. So the wit or the witty expression that we find in Cleveland's poems is like a hard nut, and it breaks our teeth when we try to explain it, try to understand it, but we do not get any reward because inside the nut there is no kernel. That is, the thought encapsulated by the expression, the thought is not very rich or high. It is a poor kind of thought, and therefore only the expression is very difficult. So when we face this difficulty and finally understand the expression, then we see that the meaning is very trivial and it cannot, reward us for our difficulty. So that there is this difference between his satires and Dr. Donne's, that the one gives us deep thoughts in common language to rough cadence, and the other gives us common thoughts in abstruse words. So Dryden is comparing Cleveland to Donne and says that in Donne we find deep thoughts in common expression, in common language, to rough cadence, because Donne never maintained the meter, for which Ben Jonson said that he should be hanged. So in Donne's poetry we find great thoughts, deep thoughts, even though the language is common. But in Cleveland's poetry we find the opposite, common thoughts in abstruse words. Abstruse means difficult, obscure words. It is true in some places his wit is independent of his words, as in the Rebel Spot. So I will explain this quotation from the Rebel Spot in the next class. So I would like to stop here. If you have any questions, you can ask.